One of the National Air and Space Museum's most popular attractions is the studio model of the USS Enterprise from the TV series Star Trek. As part of the museum's ongoing renovation, the model's been pulled back into the conservation lab for further restoration before going back out on display. Dr. Margaret Whitekamp, curator and chair of the Space History Department at the Smithsonian, takes me on a deep dive tour through the model and explains why this particular piece of science fiction history is such an important part of their collection.
So, Margaret, this is not a new acquisition for the museum. Is that correct?
No, this came to the museum in 1974 directly from Paramount and was a part of an exhibit actually that was first in the Arts and Industries building and then built again in the National Mall building when that building opened in 1976.
It's in unbelievable shape. I mean, you guys restored it 7 years ago, is that right?
Yes, we did. We did a big project in between 2014 and 2016 to take it off display, really look at every single piece of it, and then bring it back to public display.
So that involved sort of getting to know something that had already been here for decades.
Yes.
Getting to know it at a level like taking all its clothes off and putting them back on again, yeah?
Very much so. And really thinking through all of the details, the lights, the decals, the windows, the paint job, the finish, how we were going to light it. And really thinking about that in terms of the history of everything that we could document photographically and otherwise that would get us to making the right decisions at the right points.
It is so rare that an artifact like this is in this good a shape. Am I right about that? That seems anomalous.
Richard Dayton, who built this from Matt Jeffries' design, really was a master at his craft. It's a tight build. The bottom is really a wooden barrel that holds together. There's a wooden structure that holds the saucer together with some vacuum-formed plastic on the top. And then all of the pieces really fit together so beautifully that, you know, honestly, when you have to drive the staves in to put the two nacelle engines into that engineering hall, you need to give it a bit of a whack because it's pretty tightly shimmed in.
There's a special Enterprise hammer?
Not quite, okay. But we have our chief conservator was in charge of that. That's not a job you give to the historian.
Yeah, I would imagine. So I want to talk about the saucer for a second, because like, when we see it on television, we think of the Enterprise as a color, like a sort of a medium gull gray.
Right.
But there is so much variegation and color going on this paint job. This is original?
This is original, which is just a treasure to have. There is detailing that's been done with pencil lines. There's a little bit of cracking and crazing that was not intentional, but that shows kind of how well this has aged. And then, yes, bits of brown, bits of green that really kind of give it a little bit of dimension and depth and weight, and that really would have, even though on your little glowy little cathode ray tube, if through your childhood memory, you remember it as a gray-white, this is what it was actually.
And each of these little details, like the amount of weathering coming up to the bridge, these are all things that help build the scale of it once it's on screen.
Very much so, because you wanted it to, Matt Jeffries' idea was that immediately you should see that there are dozens, if not hundreds of people on board.
Right.
And that it is something that is built to go fast. Roddenberry's direction was he wanted something that looked like it would go great distances and fast, but no like rocket, exhaust flames shooting out the back like some sort of Buck Rogers thing from the 30s. It had to look powerful, so you get the engines and you get the saucer and then the engineering hull below.
I'm also, you said pencil line, and that was the first time I realized that these panel lines are not etched into plastic the way we would have done at ILM. This is the 60s. And to be sure, I have added panel lines in pencil, but this is astounding. This is original pencil panel lines.
Yes.
Holy cow. That is absolutely gorgeous.
And it does just give it that great sense of detail that it would have been constructed.
Yeah.
Right? That it wasn't just kind of some undifferentiated flying saucer.
Even here, I feel a sense of real scale from it.
Yes.
You talked about the speed, and I think this is a reasonable angle if you can see both nacelles. I love that they're tapered and that they describe a vanishing point.
Yes.
Right, they're always pointing, so you can always see the path that this thing has come from because of the nacelles.
It's very clear what direction it's going, and then it's going to go there fast.
Incredible. Tell me about figuring out the paint scheme, because this is original, but there is some stuff you guys had to repaint. Is that right?
Yes. There was a lot that we needed to repaint in order to really make sure that everything was adhering the way that we wanted it to, and to get the archival, and to make sure that we got the details right. And so actually, you can see now that we have this bolt cover off. You know, in the lore, that has a function as a part of the ship. In the model, it covered the giant bolts that hold the dorsal and keep the saucer on. But this was one of the places where we've got paint that we know doesn't have varnish, hasn't aged in the same way and weathered in the same way that the rest has. And that was a place where we were really able to get our paint guy, and it is such a collaboration and so much teamwork to have him being able to pull those samples and really figure out what the base colors were going to be, and then to be able to work with John Goodson and Kim Smith and Bill George on figuring out how we were going to do all of the detailing. And then having this moment when we had a little bit of a dispute about how are the detail colors matching up with what we know that the base color should be. And that was a place where our schedule is very different than what happens in Hollywood, where everything is about schedule and it has to be done for tomorrow's shoot. And I called a stop, and we sat for an hour in a conference room and went over all of the details until everyone was happy with,
and on the same page.
And on the same page, and then we come back to the piece.
Wow. And when you look to replicate the colors, are you also trying to replicate the original composition of the paint, or is it enough that it's archival and the correct color?
It's enough that it's archival and the correct color, but also the right balance. And one of the things that I learned in working on this about paint is also the ways that paint scales. So, you know, you need it to be a different shade because it's this big, because it's 11 feet long, because it's 200 pounds, in order for it to then get the effect that you want. So when you're painting your model that might be a foot long, your shades are going to be slightly different than what you need to get the same effect on something this scale.
I talk about it on our channel all the time about painting for camera. Painting so that the camera sees it, not for your eye. And often a paint job for camera looks a little garish in person, or a little bit overly broad. Now,
and we spend a lot of time trying to figure out, you know, how much of this interior, is there a shading that's in there, or is there just shade because the light isn't getting in there? And in fact, there's not a darker color inside those rings. But that was one of the places where we were really working out the places where there is a slight kind of almost blue aqua that runs up the front of the dorsal.
Amazing.
But it balances right and it looks right.
Now I see like a kind of a sort of a streak here, very subtle airbrush streaks. Now, Kim Smith, who painted this, I worked with Kim at ILM, and John and Bill. She's an unbelievable painter, but you didn't just set her onto this nacelle with an airbrush, right?
No. They did a lot of work. They did a lot of testing. We went into a model shop here in the D.C. area, actually in Northern Virginia, and bought them out of almost everything. They really wanted to know, how many of these tiny bottles do you want? And she said, like, all of them.
Amazing.
And so she was mixing her own things in order to get the right colors and the right tints, and then also did a lot of testing. And then we looked at those tests under a lot of different lights. So we would carry them to the windows and look at them in natural light. We have some color balance lighting in here in the conservation lab at the Udvar-Hazy Center, but we really wanted to think about not only does it look right when you're up close to it? Does it look right when you're back? And then how would it be lit at the end?
And it's also never just one color. I'm noticing a little brown and a little gray in these streaks, that there's an addition of several colors.
And it's wonderfully light and subtle, so that
Yes.
when you stand back, it doesn't look striped.
No.
But when you really get right up close, you can see that depth that has been created. And I'm excited about that with the final display. This goes in a case where you really can get a 360-degree view look of it when it goes back downtown.
Now, you said that this has a television side. The viewer here is looking at the non-television side of the Enterprise.
Yes, they're over there on the port side, which is
You've
where...
never seen that
which
side
you've never
in the
seen.
show. Yeah.
No, all the wires come out of that, and they wouldn't have been neat at the time because they knew they were going to be masked out when they composited the shot and put the starfield or the planet or whatever was going to go behind it.
So you get to call out all of those details that were shifted from left to right.
Yes.
Depending on, because of what the filmmakers had to see versus what needed to get built.
And the design was that they had reverse decals that they could have put on backwards decals and flipped the film. If you watch Mirror Mirror, that episode, they flipped the film and they didn't bother to flip the decals. It's such a short shot that it works, and it's actually the original pilot version of this vehicle, which has a bit of a spire sticking out of the front of the nacelle.
Can we take a look at some of the details on the body here, on the barrel?
Sure.
All right, first of all, I can't even believe that I'm underneath the main dish of the Enterprise, but this is where we can really see some of the difference between the television and non-television side. Like, this piece here isn't even replicated on the left side.
No, there's nothing over here. That's empty space. They wouldn't have put the detailing on this side because they knew you weren't going to see it. And this really then is the heart, the engineering heart of the ship and the heart of the model. It is really this engineering hull, which is made of essentially like a barrel of wood.
Of plywood.
And then this dorsal does an awful lot of engineering to kind of pull all of these pieces together. And then I think also when you shine your light in, you can get a little bit of a sense of how much illumination you get from the Plex windows and how much that really brings it to life.
They're amazing. They're these thick chunks of acrylic that you said are press fit. They're like jammed in.
They're jammed in. I think he basically hammered them in, and
they're like light pipes.
Yes, exactly.
That is amazing. And that was after the fact.
That was after the fact. Richard Dayton asked when the studio commissioned this model, did they want interior lighting? And they said no, they didn't want to pay for it. And then when the show got greenlit, they came back to him, could they have interior lighting? And so he figured out a way to add it in a way that really creates the effect with spots of light, but it does immediately create this impression that you're looking at a ship that would carry a very large crew complement.
When I was a kid watching this, I would picture myself in some of those little lit rooms. And even here on the dorsal, I can see there's no windows on this side. It's all wires sticking out.
Yes, and this is where all the wiring and things would have come. They might have been gaffer taped to the back of the model, but I've also seen shots where it just hangs onto the floor because they know they're going to mask it out when they composite the shots. They were using multiple effects houses in Hollywood between the transporter effects laying in the star fields behind this. Generally, it was a rather expensive show because of the need to kind of add all of these effects afterward.
Now that I'm looking at it, I'm a little bit overwhelmed by how many lights I can see. There's these blinky lights here on the bottom, and then were there any, even this is translucent, I think, does that also get lit?
I think it does have a little bit of lighting that comes from behind it, and what I like about this are the ways that the lights on the sides of the saucer really mimic what you would have on a ship or an aircraft. So red on one side, green on the other.
Was there any place in this ship that you were not able to relight?
No, I think we really did everything we needed to. There's no lighting in the nacelles other than the front. That effect is enough and draws your eye so much that you don't really notice that there isn't anything farther back.
Yeah, yeah.
And also it reinforces that sense of the Matt Jeffries design that each of these pieces had a purpose.
Right. And I from the underside, I'm also still noticing the incredible pencil lines that add so much scale detail
Yes.
to this thing. Oh, and these are lights too. Oh my goodness. These are windows as well.
Yes.
Wow. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Seriously. I would totally imagine what it's like in an office over there. The windows
Yes.
really, it's like the bridge of a cruise ship.
Right. Which room should be yours?
Yeah. Margaret, the last time I was here, I was covering the X-Wing that you guys were
Yes.
bringing to the museum. It's so thrilling to see this. I love going from a dystopia and ending with a utopia. I mean, Star Trek's vision of the future isn't just a virtuous cycle in terms of space travel, but really also of society, isn't it?
Very much so. And I love this piece for the ways that it can represent the imagination about spaceflight, but also that vision of, what humanity could be, what that crew could look like. That was so powerful for NASA's own history, and that really connects still with people.
And I would bet that a fairly large percentage of people who built many of the space artifacts in this museum were inspired by this very model.
Yes, I think very much so. The Star Trek universe especially, we know there are many astronauts and many folks who are in mission control and behind the scenes who were inspired by this and are now making their own version of that vision come true.
Well, I'm freshly inspired by it. It is an amazing object. Thank you so much for taking me on a tour through this.
Oh, this was a great afternoon. Thank you.
Now I've got to make one for myself.